Where is Turkey heading in its interaction with the NATO alliance? How does the US plan to ensure its continued cooperation with this country? How does the Russian and Ukrainian war challenge or facilitate Turkey's regional and international ambitions? I'm Nakhavali, and this is Middle East Analitika. Atilla, welcome back to the second part of this episode.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Yeah.
I was looking at the public opinion poll conducted by Turkish firm Metropol. Some 48% of those asked believe that NATO and the United States were responsible for the Russian and Ukrainian war. Somewhere about 33% blamed Russia, and 7.5% believed Ukraine brought the war upon itself. Despite its membership in NATO, Turkey purchased Russian S-400 anti-aircraft system, which probably could harm NATO. And we know that also Turkey didn't adopt sanctions on Russia following the war with Ukraine, and reportedly gave shelter to pro-Putin Russian oligarch. So how do you think that these issues might influence Turkey's future interactions within the NATO alliance?
The anti-Western or anti-Western sentiment in Turkey has deep roots, and it's not limited to Islamists or conservatives. Also, Kemalists have deep resentment towards the West because of Sevr Treaty, or what we call the Sevr syndrome in Turkey. The idea that the West has never gotten over the war of independence, and they still want to split off Turkey and divide it up among themselves. So these figures are not unrealistic. Turks used to be very antagonistic to Russia because of the communist atheism, but since Putin became converted to Orthodox Christianity, that problem has disappeared. There are numerous polls on how Turkey feels about NATO and EU membership. It turns out to be that Turks are extremely conflicted. They don't trust either institution, but they realize that Turkey doesn't have a future without a membership involved, also in EU. So I think, Turkey would remain. This is sort of like the Turkish soul. It's forever divided between the West and the East. But when we take the heart out of the matter and people start to think rationally, then the choice is the West. Mr. Erdogan's Russia policy is completely personalized, and it doesn't really serve in any way Turkey's benefits. I'm talking about, his political relationship with Russia, not the economic policy. And a very good manifestation of that is the S-400s. NATO made it very, very clear that it will not allow a member to use such a high technology and intrusive Russian weapon. Mr. Erdogan, I don't know how many $1 billion he paid, couldn't even activate the S-400s. They're rotting in a silo somewhere, God knows, still in Turkey. But through this personal decision, he raised deep suspicions in the American administration and Congress, as well as in NATO, about Turkey's affiliation to the West. And that turned out to be very costly. There were arms embargoes, even of strategic materials, and Turkey was an outcast in NATO in the sense that the United States began drafting plans to form a second defensive alliance against future potential aggression to the south of Turkey. In other words, it renewed its relationship with Greek Cypriots and Greece, which was a major loss for Turkey. So now Mr. Erdogan is backpedaling. Again, with all of his U-turns, it's not clear whether he has made the final choice to stay on the new policy course and pay the price For instance, he wants negotiations for a new and expanded customs union from EU. But does he really understand that he needs to make compromises in Cyprus and in terms of democracy? He desperately needs NATO protection and NATO weaponry, such as F-16s, but does he understand that would at the end mean approving or ratifying Swedish membership, which he still hasn't decided on, I'm afraid, and somehow turning over the keys to S-400s to a NATO officer, possibly from Sweden? I'm not so sure about that. But at the end, Turkey needs to make a political choice about its vocation as to which camp it belongs to, simply because of my view that a new Cold War has started. The great powers, this time led by China and the United States, are going to slug it out for the next 10 years. Now, countries like Brazil, South Africa may remain independent, or India, because of their location or their economic help. Turkey can't. We are heavily reliant on Western trade and financing and weaponry and tourism. And we are at such a strategic location that without Turkey's aid, defeating Russia in a permanent way is simply not possible. And I don't think the choice of how we play this game is clear to Erdogan or any of the leaders of the opposition. This is sort of going to stay in a limbo. As far as the immediate concern of the Ukrainian war, I think Mr. Erdogan is playing that game very astutely. He annoys Putin from time to time, or the West, but at the end, both sides consider the relationship with Erdogan transactional. So, in other words, Mr. Erdogan helping Ukraine export grain through a new safe corridor is not going to impair his relationship with Putin. And similarly, his efforts to bring Putin back to the table or export Russian grain to Africa, if that's to be believed, are not going to annoy NATO. To me, though, the crunch time for Erdogan and Turkish political elite comes in 2024 for two reasons. A, Ukraine war is not going to be won by either side. It's a horrific human tragedy and a war of attrition. Neither side has the wherewithal to win decisive victory. At the end, either Putin or the West will make a final push. The West will probably try to cut out all Russian trade, and then they'll need to, see Turkey controlling Black Sea for them, and possibly abiding by Russian sanctions. Putin will need Turkey to completely seize military aid to Ukraine and allow Russian grain and other strategic commodities to be transported. And of course, if rumors are to be believed, is using Turkish companies to sidestep sanctions on sensitive technology goods. In 2024, when both sides are tired and they need to make a final push, they will need Turkey to take sides. Two, a lot depends on American elections. Russia is counting on Trump being reelected, who is a completely ignorant moron when it comes to this issue. With all due respect to Mr. Trump, who's a fine fellow in other aspects, I'm sure. But if he wins, I think the entire calculus will change. Right. If United States stops military and economic aid to Ukraine, the Western coalition will collapse. Then clearly Mr. Erdogan's, calculation of re-engaging NATO and EU may change as well. But until then, the best he can do is try to appease both sides and not to annoy one of the sides too much.
Right. We'll get back to US and EU complex relationship with Turkey. But now let's talk about the latest NATO submissions. We know that Erdogan really gave a hard time to both Finland and Sweden to join NATO. So, what were the essential agreements of the accord that enabled Turkey to waive its veto against Finland and Sweden's NATO submissions?
Finland wasn't a huge problem. It was simply collateral damage. Erdogan didn't want to single out Sweden, so he pretended to reject the accession of both countries. With Sweden, the main problem is that it has become a harbor for Turkish political refugees. Now, in Mr. Erdogan's view, we're all traitors and spies for foreign powers because we don't necessarily agree with them. And that's true for a lot of the people who have sought refuge in Sweden. Simply put, Turkey doesn't make a difference between peaceful advocacy, which is a human right and a fundamental right, and supporting military aggression, which is terrorism. The people he wants Sweden to extradite are largely the former category. They are not terrorists, but they advocate peaceful PKK, Kurdish separation. They are members of the Gülenist organization, which is a crime in Turkey, even though these people have not really committed any misdemeanors or felonies. At the end, Sweden didn't really do much except change its constitution in a cosmetic way. And Mr. Erdogan relented because he has bigger fish to hunt or catch with NATO. But the second issue, which reared its ugly head recently, is a huge problem, not only for Sweden and Turkey, but for the entire Muslim world. And I don't see any clean solutions to it. The Western world is very relaxed about religion. I'm in the United States and I watch comedy shows, talk shows, and people can talk about Biden or Jesus Christ in any way they want to, in a very sultry way, in fact. The Muslim world, liberal Muslims, adherents of political Muslim, cannot accept Quran burning. That's a fact. And how we reconcile this very clash of civilizations type of dichotomy, I really don't know. In my view, here, Sweden needs to compromise one way or other. Through the deep state, I would propose Quran burnings need to be stopped. It's not impossible, but extremely difficult for Mr. Erdogan to convince his coalition partners to ratify Swedish membership as long as these Quran burnings go on. He's not only going to lose political capital at home, he might also lose political capital in the Arab world, among the Arab citizenry, which he really cares about. So to me, ratification of Swedish accession is not a done deal. I don't think extradition is such a huge problem. At least it can be solved over the years, and the Turkish people can be made to forget that terrorists are still living in Sweden. But for a few months, the Quran burnings and other assaults on the religion of Islam needs definitely to stop for Erdogan to create the kind of environment which would allow him to push through ratification to the Turkish Grand Assembly.
Right. Now let's talk about the United States relationship with Turkey. We know that Turkey is also on constant coalition course with Washington due to actually there are many issues, but maybe we can name some of them. American support for Syrian Kurds, whom Turkey consider a terror organization, and United States recognition of the Armenian genocide, and many, many more issues. From the other side, Erdogan coordinates his military activity in Syria with Putin. You already mentioned the purchase of S-400 missile system. And we also talked about speculation of negotiation between Assad and Erdogan, which is contrary to the American position. So if we accept that there are growing differences between the two countries, how does the U.S. plan to ensure its continued cooperation with Turkey?
Actually, the relationship between Turkey and Russia and Turkey and the United States are fairly easy in the sense that they become completely transactional. There is really no alliance. There is no strategic overarching concern that unites or separates these countries. United States, when it has an issue with Turkey, it deals purely with that issue, offers Turkey rewards or shows the stick, and Turkey responds similarly. At this point, S-400s are not an immediate concern because Erdogan shows no signs of ever activating them, so that can wait. Syrian Kurds, too, are not a serious issue between Erdogan. They matter to MHP, but Mr. Bahçeli is so closely bound to AKP that the relationship has become symbiotic. They too need to learn to get along and work out their differences. What US wants from Turkey at this point is to increase military aid to Ukraine and to make sure that Turkish companies don't break sanctions. And of course, switch membership. In return, Biden would probably persuade skeptical senators to sign off on the F-16 order, which is hugely important to Turkey. Turkey's indigenous jet fighter will be ready maybe in 10 years, and it needs American engines, that kind of thing. And, the Turkish Air Force has really degraded significantly because F-16 and upgrades and maintenance. So I think Biden is quite willing to leave aside deeper philosophical and political differences and work on the F-16 file. It's very simple. Just like Putin and Xi Jinping, Erdogan also hopes for a Trump victory. No other conservative would do it. Mr. Trump is just one of a kind. And he likes Erdogan and Putin and Xi Jinping. Obviously, I don't know enough about American politics to comment on Trump's chances of re-election. But if he is re-elected, this whole relationship is going to change. In a very strange way, Erdogan is going to become more pro-Russia and also have a much easier time getting along with the American administration.
Right. And sorry for the connection. For some seconds, your picture was frozen, but now the connection is fine. Okay, let's move toward EU's relationship with Turkey. We know that the relationship between this union and Turkey is complex. The relation had many ups and downs, and several key issues have shaped their interactions. The EU has criticized Turkey for its human rights record, and also for you mentioned earlier, actually, the Turkey's action toward Greece and Cyprus. Yet the EU also sees Turkey as an important partner. There are many issues like migration, which they need to work on. So how has the EU attempted to strike a balance between condemning Turkey's actions and maintaining a partnership with this country?
I think there is rethinking both in Ankara and in Brussels about what to do with each other. In Ankara, it's mostly an economic issue. Turkey definitely needs a new customs union because the old one is simple, doesn't cover services, which is the growth industry, or agriculture, where Turkey can increase its exports, and also it doesn't include third parties with which EU has signed free trade deals, which means that if a country has a free trade deal with EU, Turkey must adopt EU regulations and open its borders to the goods and services of that country, but there is no reciprocity, and obviously that's not a sustainable situation. So suddenly, negotiations for a new and extended customs union have become a coveted economic prize for Mr. Erdogan. And he's trying to figure out how little he needs to give away to get a date for negotiations. In terms of EU, I don't think the Syrian refugee problem is a huge concern to them. But Erdogan's successful intermediation and his ability to talk to Putin in the Ukraine war has suddenly elevated Turkey's geostrategic importance. before the elections or before the Ukraine war, EU's approach was simply just ignore Erdogan. Just don't deal with him at all. Send him a couple of bucks or euros for refugees and just tell him shut up. But now EU also needs to incentivize Turkey to continue aiding Ukraine or not turning completely pro-Russian. But the huge obstacle here is while the relationship between Erdogan and Biden is transactional, there is really no ideology or principles involved. EU cannot act without the fundamental principles of Copenhagen criteria and the Cyprus issue. EU simply cannot deal with a country that doesn't recognize one of its members and completely violates Copenhagen criteria, in particular to file verdicts by the European Court of Human Rights about Osman Kavala and Selahattin Demirtas, Turkey's political prisoners. How they are going to finesse this issue will become apparent only at the end of October. To gain time, EU leaders have asked the Commission to prepare a very detailed report, a practical report, not one that criticizes Turkey's shortcomings, but to identify areas where further cooperation is possible. And Mr. Erdogan has only 2 or 3 months to see what he can do at the democracy front. I think something will be done. I don't think it's negotiations for the customs union. But EU can probably relax its implicit veto on Turkish citizens and tourists visiting EU. 2, some kind of visa liberalization, at least for business people or academics, is a possibility. As I've said, Athens is comfortable with giving Turkey some incentives in return for a new round of talks in Cyprus. Greek Cypriots, their position is not clear. They definitely want to start new talks in Cyprus, but whether they would lift their veto on any matter Turkish would require just talks starting or making some kind of progress is not clear to me. Again, my view is that, Mr. Erdogan's pragmatism will have to be severely tested in October. What can Turkey do? Clearly, releasing Selahattin Demirtas and Osman Kavala would be the most powerful catalyst in better relations with the EU. Is that possible? It's not going to cost much to Erdogan to do so, but whether he would do it, I have no idea. His second option is to officially start negotiations with the opposition for a new constitution, which is not going to change the facts on the ground that the judiciary is completely supplicant to him, but optically it may look good if it is more libertarian. 3, very low probability, but it's also going to have a huge symbolic effect. Go back to the Istanbul Convention to prevent abuse and violence against women. To me, I think new constitutional talks is the most feasible option, or the only thing that Erdogan can offer to EU at this point.
Right. As a last question, let's get back to the war issues between Russia and Ukraine and the challenges and opportunities which it has for Turkey. With Turkey aiming to preserve and enhance its global and regional position, and considering its aspiration to become a regional Muslim superpower capable of shaping a post-Western security architecture, how does the Russian-Ukrainian war challenge or facilitate these ambitions?
Again, my views are kind of contrary in this area. I think Erdogan likes this war of attrition, and if it lasts another decade, he wouldn't mind, in the sense that it saps the strength of both sides. From the Ukrainian perspective, it makes West more dependent on what Turkey can do through the drones, a new corvette, or any kind of other clandestine military aid or economic aid. With respect to Russia, clearly, the more resources Putin spends on Ukraine, the less time he has to help Armenia and Mr. Assad. So Erdogan is I'm reading his mind. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but, from the way I read the map, he doesn't really mind. The problem is that Ukraine is not going to become a frozen conflict. Putin has proven that he can put all of his chips on the table when he mentioned nuclear weapons. He can take unbelievable risks to end this war. And with the West, the perspective is different. The Western politicians understand their policy very well. Polity, not policy, polity, their citizenry very well. They cannot indefinitely provide military aid to Ukraine unless they get some quick results. As I've said, that's when the crunch time starts for Mr. Erdogan. It's not the grain corridor. It's not small size sanctions busting. It's probably late 2024 after American elections. Either side or both sides will make the final push. And whichever side needs to win, needs Turkey most. To me, if you're talking about the end game, Erdogan would probably be happier if the West won, simply because that would make Russia more reliant on Turkey. It would push Russia away from Black Sea and allow Mr. Erdogan to establish control. And of course, a Russian victory doesn't really provide any economic opportunities above and beyond what's transpiring right now. But Ukrainian reconstruction, again, I want to deeply apologize to you and to all of our audiences because I sound like a completely cold-hearted fat cat capitalist. I want them to understand I really feel deeply for all those Russian and Ukrainian young men and women who are losing their lives. But there's a huge reconstruction pie, and Turkey's construction and contracting industry is almost certain to get a very good share of that pie.
Atilla, thank you very much, and it was a real pleasure talking to you.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to watch and hear your new podcast in the future.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching and listening to us. Please don't forget to subscribe.